Hi.
Hello. How do you do?
Very
Oh.
calm, very calm,
Hi.
very relaxed. Hello.
We're very zen today.
Well,
Ah,
welcome to Empathy Power Up, everyone.
yeah, welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's a lovely day in the neighborhood. Uh, and we're going to be conversation today about pursuing happiness. That's the theme for the month. Pardon my cough. I am getting over some kind of sickness. I think everybody seems to be sick lately um, with some kind of sickness. So today we're gonna go deeper into Kevin's philosophy, this aha moment that he had recently, and we're gonna just continue the conversation. But before we do, I wanted to chat a little bit about kind of like recapping last session since we since some of you might not have actually participated in that. Um, and let me open up the show notes. So one thing we learned is that number one is happiness is kind of a core need that we have as humans. Which you defined, Kevin, and you're going to go a little bit deeper into that. But we also talked about how Maslow and the hierarchy of needs that we have in the grand scheme of things. You probably have heard of it as like food, shelter, water, like physical needs is kind of something that Maslow stole from indigenous communities by observing them. So, in a way, he just was looking at these communities and stealing from them. But also, we have these deeper needs that aren't just a physical need. It's actually a lot of emotional needs. So, especially in today's society, we have that. And then three, we also redefining happiness as a state of being where somebody is both extremely empathetic on one side, but also extremely selfish. So have this feeling of pleasure and contentment. So that is kind of what we went over last week. But this week, Kevin's going to go much deeper. He's going to ask me some questions. I did not prepare. I don't know the questions ahead of time. We're just going to dive deeper into this. So, Kevin, how about you
Yeah.
go?
Yeah, I really wanted us to come today was focus a little bit on what we already know from science and research and the psychology, the world of psychology and philosophy. There's a lot of intersection coming into where with happiness comes in, and so despite there being a variety of ways to consider the human experience of pleasure or pain, the majority of research in hedonic psychology, and I'll talk about what that means, looks into the assessment of subjective well-being. So what subjective well-being, or in this case, they use it as happiness, consists of three components: life satisfaction, the presence of positive mood, and the absence of negative mood. So before I go any deeper, I think the part that we like hedonism, we've heard hedonism, we might have used it in
Mhm.
various contexts, but it is basically defined as the pursuit of pleasure, sensual self-indulgence. And around philosophy, where this is the intersection of philosophy comes in, the ethical theory that pleasure, in the sense of the satisfaction of desires, is the highest good and proper aim of human life. So that's where like the theory, like the philosophy of hedonism comes from, or that talks about rather. And so there's this whole idea of hedonism and this self-indulgence and removing negative mood and presence of positive mood and life satisfaction. But a lot of the new theories or like modern discussions around happiness are all aligned towards this theory of eudaimonic happiness. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I've read it and learned it through reading. So eudaimonic happiness has its basis in the concept of self-actualizing individual. So we talked about Maslow. You just mentioned, Amy, about Maslow. This idea of a person is fully self-actualized when they're born. They're a fully functional person when they're born. And then if we give them that fully actualized, fully functional person and help them and support them in staying that way and being that way, then like that is a form of this Eudemic happiness, is the idea that we are fully actualized. So when we grow up in the world we currently live in, we don't get to be a fully self-actualized person. And that's the part that's shocking. And that's what Maslow learned from when he was observing the indigenous folk, that in that community, a child, a baby is born, and that person is a self-actualized, fully self-actualized person who understands themselves, and then it's just more about them learning about themselves versus the society and the community telling them how to be and what they are and what they should be. And that's the system we live in. You grew up in US, I grew up in India, but we had very similar experiences in our systems that we exist in. You should be this way. You should pray this way. You should behave this way. You should think this way, dress this way, cut your hair this way. That's not a self-actualized person. And so that's the newer theories around eudaimonic philosophy of happiness that we talk about. I'll pause here if you have any comments or questions before I continue.
I find this really fascinating because I think it's this place of just being like, I often, when I'm on my healing journey, I talk about like, you are good enough just the way you are. And you don't need to produce, the whole thing of capitalism is like, you are what you produce. And so in a lot of ways, healing ourselves has to do with teaching ourselves that just by being, we're enough, right?
Yeah.
And so it makes me think about that kind of mentality around like, we're a fully functioning person just by being, right?
Yeah.
And that I think almost like just bring this full circle, like throughout life, we are like our happiness is removed, little by little.
Yes.
Almost like our creativity
Yes.
is removed as we get older and more things are introduced into our life. And more values are pushed upon us. So that definitely makes sense to me.
Yeah, and so that's really and what's interesting is the folk that Maslow was observing, they did not remove your humanity and who you are one by one and your happiness in that sense. They celebrated what you brought and who you are in every way, and it's not that you should be this way. And so that has led to us constantly pursuing happiness, but not realizing that we as a society are removing happiness from each other by not allowing ourselves to be self-actualized people. So a conversation that comes up around this is what we think makes us happy versus what truly makes us happy. And there is a disconnect there. With a lot of the times we think things will make us happy, but they don't. And that's what we learn. So for example, a good job and money, like correlation between income and life satisfaction is 0.1, which is a very small level of correlation in that. Connection between income and life satisfaction stronger in poorer countries, and it doesn't matter like in richer countries, even if you have your basic needs met, that correlation and that connection between that is low. And so there is one data point where emotional well-being, so our emotional well-being increases until around $75,000 US dollars of income. And then after that, it doesn't seem to increase much more or any significant amount or any impactful amount. And so average happiness in US has dropped since the 1940s, despite us getting more stuff, this whole consumerism and getting more and buying more. I want to buy this toy, I want to buy this. So even due to that, even due to the rise of this economy and capitalism, the average happiness in US has dropped. And thinking about stuff we want and materialism tends to make us less happy, and has been tied to mental health issues as well. when we talk about true love, we think we want to find true love. And right before the show, Amy, you and I, we were talking a little bit about being single versus um, being happy as single versus this whole need. Society tells us you need to find someone as soon as we're born. Who are you going to get married? That's literally what my parents would say. Um, and like they would start planning weddings. People in India would, and there are some families that would plan weddings when as soon as the kid was born, and like, oh, that fun. It's immediately about how, that stress that the system puts in on us. And what we've learned and is that true love, that married people are happy in maybe their first 2 years, and then it goes back to baseline, and it just stays at that baseline. Perfect body, being in a weight loss program, um, and if you actually do lose weight, it tends to not make us happier as much as we think it does. Plastic surgery, people who tend to be already unhappy, and then they think that plastic surgery will make us happy, and then they go get it, doesn't change, doesn't make much of an impact. So what we're learning through this is what we think makes us happy. Oh, we're unhappy right now. This thing will make us happy. Me going and getting that has led to not understanding that and being finding happiness in that sense. I'll pause here again. There's a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about all of these different things when it comes to like having a perfect body. I have heard many stories of people who who've lost a ton of weight, then they realize that they're still the same person deep down inside that they always have, right? I think you had a weight loss journey too, Kevin, and and like people still have those insecurities that they had when they were heavier, right? Um, so I that does definitely resonates with me. And I think also this idea of like finding love and making that happy for us. The podcast I listened to recently was Life Kit from NPR. And one of the things that I think, past generations thought happiness was being married and all these different things. But what is interesting is that being married in the past, when we talk about like, happiness in the 1940s and the past, 50, 60, 70 years, is that being married meant stability to a lot of people, right? So being married, like before, like sometimes women couldn't open bank accounts, right? They couldn't buy houses, they couldn't do all this stuff. So it was a form of like saving yourself, of just like being able to perform in society.
Yeah,
so it's interesting. Huh?
Just live.
Yeah, to live. So I think there's a level here where it's like, I think if you look at it from the perspective, and a lot of things are done from like a male perspective, but if you look at it from a female perspective, I think that there might be a little bit, obviously we're progressing as a society when it comes to giving women, like the right to the right to vote has been around for a while, but the things that the rights that men also have, right? So I think there's so much that's interesting, but there's also this angst because there is this system that's set up, which, in my session earlier today with somebody, they were saying, I really wish like my identity as a woman is what's first and foremost, because I recognize every day the things that do not like are not afforded me, or the challenges I have because I'm a woman, right? So anyway, it's kind of going off of the reservation a little bit there, but these are just like some thoughts that I'm really tapping into here.
So we appreciate you sharing that, and I think that's where it dives into us. Okay, why don't these things make us happy, right? And you start sharing some of this, like, oh, because well, women don't even have rights, as an example. But like, and then the question comes up: what about our brain and our genetics? So twin studies have shown that there is about 50% genetics impact around how we feel happiness, but the remaining is based on the things that happen around us, which is a 10% about approximately. and then the actions and our thoughts lead to about 40% of that contribution towards why don't these things make us happy. And what's interesting to me is that our minds, our strongest intuitions are often totally wrong. So example of optical illusions. When we look at an optical illusion, remember that blue dress and the gold dress thing? People were like, this is blue. It's like strongest intuition. It's often wrong. And because our minds are looking for pattern, what we're looking for is something that we understand. It's not what the truth is or what the fact is, how we understand. So our mind sometimes miswants what we is a phrase, miswants. And we think in absolutes. Sorry, we don't think in absolutes. We don't think in terms of absolutes. Our mind judge relative to a reference point. So we have reference points, and so we can think in those reference points. So winners of bronze are often much happier than winners of silver. So reference points for ourselves are like media and TV and social media and comic books we like, or like literature that we like. Those are become our reference points for us to think and understand some of these happiness and points. And what I am hoping to propose within the theory of happiness is we restate our reference point to ourselves, to our experiences and what we've experienced versus someone else's reference points. And that's sort of what the journey I'm trying to do as well. And then I know we're getting close to time, but like the last point I will make here before we push it off to next week is our minds are built to get used to stuff, especially around hedonic, and it's called hedonic adaptation. Process of becoming accustomed to positive and negative stimulus such that the emotional effects of that stimulus are attenuated over time. Once we get the things we think will make us happy, we get used to them. And so then once we get used to them, that resets our personal reference points. So hence things and stuff doesn't make us as happy as experiences do, because experience we can anticipate, experience we can experience, and then it lingers after, and then we don't get used to it because we're not just constantly in that experience all the time. I'll pause because I see some comments, but do you have any thoughts, Amy?
Yeah, Holly gave a couple of options.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of my first gut reactions is hedonic adaptation. Like hedonism is something that's very eschewed in our society. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that if you look at it from the research, just talking about narcissism and hedonism kind of, and so how might we have hedonistic tendencies to, invest in experiences and have this hedonistic adaptation happening, but at the same time being able to not dive into narcissism, right?
Yep.
And I was just talking about that in my earlier session today, is like on one side of the spectrum, you have you have your own positionality of who you are as a person and how you show up. But Dr. Brené Brown talks about how empathy is not just looking at it, hearing somebody else's story through your perspective and how you see the world, but it's about seeing how the other person sees the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot to unravel there too. So maybe we can slow some of the stuff down next time to talk more about that adaptation, and also how do we get ourselves out of this, mess that I think we found ourselves in.
Yeah, that's exactly. I agree. And I think the reason I wanted to focus a little bit or bring what we know, bring what researchers and scientists and all this is stuff I didn't come up with. Everything I read was sourced from different research. And I will now, my hope was to say, okay, how do we go from what other people's happiness is to what our happiness is, and how do we understand ourselves, and how do we get there? And that's what I am trying to propose. And with the definition, again, I think, which aligns more to the eudaimonic philosophy, is if we are extremely empathetic and extremely selfish in the same moment, that state of being is the sense of happiness and life satisfaction. And I think that's what we want to get to, and we'll talk more about it. Holly, thank you for the awesome comments. Love that. Love your perspective.
Yeah, thanks for offering that, Holly. I love how that you come in every week, for almost every week, and just like is there with us for the journey. So, um, well, this has been a really thought provoking session, to kind of get the sense of like why do we think we're happy. What are some things that we can do to make ourselves a little bit happier? We're going to continue the conversation next week. Um, and then also trying to figure out like, why don't these things that we have make us happy? And so at the end of the day, um, how our brain works kind of like shows up and changes how we see the world. So I'm curious and excited next week for us to dive into that, and be like what will make us happy and how do we break down happy moments as well. So, well, join us. We're we tend to go 20 minutes instead of 15, but we got so much to share. Thank you for reading and listening and being part of this, conversation today. And join us next week, where we go deeper into this pursuing happiness conversation. And catch you soon. Bye.